the best way to acquire customers is through amazing work. And we do a great job answering RFPs, requests for proposals, and going through the government contracting process. But at the end of the day, the delivery of great work is how we've grown.
Welcome to the BigTime Podcast, where we have honest conversations with industry professionals who have advice that's right for you.
In this edition of the BigTime Podcast, we meet with Chris Wimbush, Chief Operating Officer of Rios Partners. They're one of the fastest growing management consulting firms in the country right now, so we're really excited to learn what their secret is. How have they been able to grow so rapidly in such a short time span? And is human-centered design really the best strategy for growing organizations? Today, we're going to find out. Welcome to the BigTime Podcast. I'm your host, Alexander. I'm excited to be joined by my guest today, Chris Wimbush, who's part of Rios Partners. Welcome, Chris. Good to have you on.
Thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Now, Rios Partners, a lot has been happening for you guys. I'm excited to hear both the journey that Rios Partners has been on, and you yourself, and where you're headed. I mean, going since the beginning of the pandemic, going from 20 to 80 people, a lot of change in just over a year. Your role specifically as COO, can you just share kind of what you look after?
Sure, no, absolutely. And again, thanks so much for having me. So in my role as Chief Operating Officer, I have responsibility for human resources, so taking care of our team, thinking about the employee experience, of course, compliance, but also talent and learning and development. I oversee finance, so that's everything from working with our vendors and subcontractors, working with our clients in terms of accounts receivables and payables, and improving our financial reporting processes. Administrative services, so one of the areas of growth has been rethinking our staffing model around administrative support, as well as hopefully soon moving into our first permanent office, which will be part of that piece. And then finally, technology services. So during the pandemic, obviously, as we moved to a fully remote environment, and we were doing a great job, I think, with technology services, but I'm figuring out how to onboard folks remotely, figuring out how to manage our infrastructure. That's been an interesting set of challenges. So yeah, those are the areas that I focus on and have fantastic colleagues that support.
Just a few responsibilities. Just a few. You joined in 2019. The firm itself started in 2016, correct? Two co-founders, and then added two partners later.
That's correct. Yeah, we were founded in 2016. Our two founders, Joshua and Zach, both met each other at another management consulting firm. Both were former Army officers, and were doing public sector consulting, and then decided to go out on their own. And so they formed Rios Partners. We added on two additional directors or partners, and we've been off to the races ever since.
You guys are based in Virginia as a management consulting firm. You mostly work with federal and nonprofits. Is that correct?
Yeah. So we've certainly worked with commercial clients, but our focus is really changing the world by helping to transform the nonprofits and public institutions that have a tremendous impact on the country, and even some of our other supporting work around the world. So.
Now, for our listeners who've heard our other episodes, there's usually four topics that we cover: staff, project, service, and brand. Staff, starting there though, going from 20 to 80, as we touched at the very beginning, that is quite a large leap. I mean, for the first, let's say, 3-4 years, coming up to around 20 people, good growth right there. You joined in 2019, and just within of a year or two later, jumping to 80. What can you tell me about that journey? What was that like?
Yeah, so I mean, it's been interesting to watch. I started my work on the consulting side. So I joined the company as a consultant. And so, for that first year, we were adding folks and, could see the growth. But really COVID, unfortunately, was in a lot of ways partly we do a lot of healthcare consulting for federal agencies, supply chain consulting. And so as you can imagine, there was an opportunity to help the country respond to the pandemic. And so that required often, recruiting folks and being able to work on those projects. But in a lot of ways, is sort of timing of a lot of work that we had been putting in to develop new platforms, new agencies to work for, new areas to work for. And so when, our growth was sort of a product of doing great work and being asked to do more, and the timing of it just sort of like hit for, was sort of this is great. This is, all of these things that we've been doing to move forward and to grow sort of started to, those seeds we planted started to actually grow.
When you think about if you think about what contributed to this major growth, you've teased a few things, but I'm wondering if we could just look at it a little bit deeper. You're saying you laid some seeds with the customers that you had, but then it was the pandemic because of the change in how you were consulting. You were a key person to help in this COVID environment. Can you just dive a little bit deeper?
Sure, absolutely. So some of it, some of that growth was the product of our strategy, which has been, I think that, we tend to have the view that the best way to acquire customers is do amazing work. And, we do a great job answering RFPs, requests for proposals and going through the government contracting process. But at the end of the day, the delivery of great work is how we've grown and has been our strategy. And I recognize it sounds like, everyone wants to do great work, but there are some companies that are amazing at selling and sometimes a little less great at execution on projects. And I think we pride ourselves on being good at selling, but great in terms of project execution. And so, a lot of our growth has been the product of, customers being really happy with what we've done and us being able to continue to work with them and grow within certain agencies, grow within certain offices. And that's been super fortunate for us. So, during this period of growth in the last year, some of the seeds we lay, well before the pandemic of working with agencies, of really sort of focusing on executing well and exceeding expectations, produced additional work, which was fantastic. And then there was an element of some of the work we've done for the federal government around healthcare innovation, supply chains. And as you can imagine, that was a useful skill set to be able to contribute to the pandemic response.
We'll come back to service and brand because I get delivering quality work, it matters, but maybe we could break that down. We'll come back to that later. Sure. Coming back to the people though, because yes, you did explode. What do you think of because you were part of that growth as more and more people coming on, and then you eventually became COO. What were some of the key hires? What were you looking for that okay, these are the right people when you're hiring people? Like, what's that strategy? What are you looking for?
Yeah, so I think it depends on the role. And so as we've grown, we've always been pretty good at recruiting and hiring. If you think about how our staff is configured, we have analysts, and then there's a senior version of them based on experience: an analyst, a consultant, a project leader, a principal, and a director. So that's sort of our consulting staff sort of hierarchy. And so typically, analysts are folks that are coming out of school, looking for growth and learning opportunities. Fantastic to have them on the team. Consultants are usually folks that are coming out of grad school, a little bit more work experience, expected to do a little bit more management of both client relationships and our analyst team. Project leaders, as you can imagine from the title, are folks that are leading our projects. And then principals are sort of one step. They might be leading a large platform of work or a set of projects that are related. And so for us, hiring analysts and consultants, we've always been pretty fortunate about recognizing talent, both good fidelity to our values, but also folks that are data oriented, data analysis, and delivering Using analytics is a big component of what we do. So we usually have been quite good at that. I think the challenge for growth has been on the staffing side is finding amazing project leaders and principals who can, lead whole pieces of work and projects. And I think for many companies, that's just a function of finding the right combination of skills, relationship management, and sort of desire to come to a company of our size.
Was it all smooth sailing? I mean, can you share any bumpy waters that you went through, lessons learned?
Yeah. So I think, one is, as I already mentioned, is I think figuring out how to get to know folks when you're in an entirely remote environment, especially when you need to understand some of the soft skills or non-technical skills. So for our analysts and consultants, we use a case interview, as a lot of consulting firms do. We provide that case ahead of time. They do some analysis, they present on it. So you can sort of, even in a remote environment, you could still, approximate the interview process that we used pre-COVID. The only difference was instead of coming into the office and doing your presentation, you did it virtually. For project leaders and principals, it's really about having, on some level, they go through a case interview as well, testing some different types of skills, but at its core, you want to get to know them. And so what used to be a fairly, I'd say, not brief, but like efficient hiring process where they would come in, meet with our folks, pre-pandemic, that was relatively easier to do. And so honestly, we've actually added interviews for more senior folks, or more conversations, I would almost say.
Now you scaled up with the number of people and the number of work, theoretically, because you needed the people, you have that much work. When we look at the projects and you're having to manage the people who manage the projects, what were some of the metrics and tools you were using to make sure everything was going smoothly and the people had what they needed, they were trained on what they needed, and the projects were going well?
Yeah, so it's been an evolution from, I think that's where I've seen the most change, the combination of our work and being remote and managing those projects. And so when you're 20 folks, you can get everyone in the company in the same room. You can get project teams, basically around a small, another Amazon example, I think Jeff Bezos, of the 2 pizza rule. You shouldn't have a meeting that, you can't feed with 2 pizzas. For a good chunk of our company, you could get our company's history, you could get most folks around the same conference room table. During the pandemic, and given our growth, you both could not get anyone around the same table for health and safety reasons. But more importantly, our project teams got larger. And so we've had to leverage a variety of tools in order to manage our work. We've transitioned, we're a Microsoft 365 company, for example. And so we've worked hard to leverage planner, project, to do sort of the productivity suite that Microsoft has launched. BigTime has been a big component of managing a fully virtual invoicing process. And managing who's on what projects and staff, billing rates, deliverables that need to be charged. And then, pre-pandemic, when we were smaller, a lot of the reporting that we generate out of something like BigTime, I could do, right? Oh, you need a report, you need an hours report. And what you find is when you're at 20, 30 projects, and 8 or 9 project leaders, that, the ability, it was really important to facilitate self-service of some of the analytical tools that we have available to us. And so we've been working hard to implement systems to support projects that allow project leaders and principals to sort of take charge of managing that project, whether it's the tasks through some of the Microsoft tools, whether it's the invoicing, financial reporting, team management through BigTime. We're implementing a contract management system to transition some of that legal work down to the project level. So in terms of delivering projects, we've really, that growth, I think, is where you've seen the most systems and processes break, but also get reborn as we've scaled, and you start to say, okay, where are the bottlenecks, and then how do we enable our project leaders and principals to get the data they need and the information they need to run their projects without having to ask another human being. And that's been something we've been focused on.
How one uses their time is paramount because there's only so much energy, and as a human-centered design, being able to capitalize on it is incredibly important. If you were to give any word of advice or a word of wisdom on how your own time and energy has been spent and changed since coming from 20 people now to 80 people and beyond, what comes to your mind?
Yeah, so I think, and before I got, I spent a year on the consulting staff, about another year as a manager on the business team, focused on IT and finance, and then added HR and administrative services a couple months ago. And so, certainly when I was a business operations manager, I was, 95% individual contributor. And so most of my time was spent doing. And then as we got bigger and scaled, added more folks to the business services team, built that team out more, my time is, in some areas like human resources or technology services, we've got extraordinary folks that are leading the way in those spaces. And so those have been areas where I can take a step back from being an individual contributor, and more about thinking about strategy and process management and sort of project management and prioritization. I spend a lot more of my time in those spaces, figuring out how to prioritize activities rather than doing that.
Chris, thank you for sharing the insights that you've had as you've been on your own personal journey, as well as Rios Partners has grown immensely this past year, and some of the lessons learned over this time. It has been great to be able to hear it all. Thank you.
Absolutely. It's been a pleasure.
And for those who are listening, we look forward to having you join us on our next episode of BigTime Podcast.
For more info, go to podcasts.bigtime.net and be sure to subscribe to the BigTime Podcast to get notified when our next episode goes live.